Okay, in this podcast, we're going to be talking about Trump's economy and if it's actually as strong as it really is, as he claims it is. And for this one, we're going to be going over the fact of him trying to claim that it's a lot stronger than what the data actually shows. But before this, I'm going to ask people to kindly donate to my Patreon. That's patreon.com/challenge history. And that would be currently with it, we are, once we get to a threshold that we can find affordable, that would be a few different, at least a few different people use a handful of them. Uh, there would be a giveaway at the $100 level a month of a Byzantine gold coin, and at the $50 level a month, there would be a Roman silver coin giveaway, and that's currently would be at one a year with it once we reach the threshold of at least a handful of people of each of those levels, but that'll create giveaways for stuff lower than that at a later date. But that's basically what we're going to do right now. Uh, and getting into this is basically what we need to do is analyze what's actually going on. Now, we need to look, first of all, is what's actually happened with it. Is we need to first of all look at uh, what is the economy doing as of itself when we start to examine the actual economic numbers. Now, when we start to look at the actual real inflation data, we should see that the inflation data pretty much year by year, uh, even under President Obama, was well over 10%. So if the and when we start to look at the growth of gold, which is real money, we can actually see gold grew during this period under Obama and Trump. We can actually see that gold actually had a better growth percentage-wise than the Dow Jones. Now, if he's trying to tout the stock market as a better gain, because we obviously cannot tout Main Street, the actual brick and mortar, nor the actual e-businesses as a whole, as having a greater, as improving economically, because we can see the massive shutdowns in the actual businesses, that there's massive amounts of failures from these. The only thing he can tout is the actual gains from these. In fact, he's actually pointed out that if Biden gets in office, there would actually be a deflation in the stock market. This is one of the things that he's trying to tout. I'm not saying that I support Biden at all. I don't. But the fact is, this is one of the things he's touting. He's saying, oh, if Biden gets in, you're going to lose money on your retirement funds. Well, the fact is, as we know, when you inflate a bubble, is basically that's not real money that's really there. Basically, those gains were never there to begin with, and that's artificial money. That's basically pumped up money that was never meant to be there. That's basically when people anticipate value that was never there, and it ends up basically raising up value that people anticipate that should be there, but it's really not. This comes from a lot of stock buybacks when the Federal Reserve is actually buying toxic debt up. So what they do is when the Federal Reserve buys up toxic debt, they're actually the companies were actually doing stock buybacks, and beyond that, it actually changes the actual balance sheets erroneously to make the company look a lot more stable than they really are. This creates improper business information in how investors look at it. This then creates people investing into the business and rising it up with it. Where when real data comes back in, these businesses are going to crash right back down to reality. meaning the money was never there to begin with, and in many cases, these were essentially poor business choices when it comes to investments in the first place, because you never want to invest into a business that has a lot of toxic debt. And this is what is happening in the current marketplace, as many people are doing malinvestments because the actual data is being skewed. And it's because the way the Federal Reserve is doing this with cheap money, for basically the earlier you get the money, the lower the inflation rate is. Because as basically the lower the totem pole you are on the totem pole to getting that money with it, the more inflation you get hit by. The quicker you get it, the better value you get on it. And obviously, money has an actual price. So the quicker you get it, the better value you get. And what this causes is basically those who are the wealthiest and who are the most connected to the financial industry tend to get the best deals. So those who can actually get connections with the central banking can actually are actually getting the most lucrative deals. Those who are not those who do not get those connected deals end up getting short change. Now, this is why when you've seen a lot of community banks fail, but a lot of these massive conglomerate banks end up basically expanding during this period of both Obama and Trump. They've been able to expand, and the reason why is because they have this connection through, and this is because of the policies. And it's not because of the of some type of business boom that's they're able to do. They're able to be a lot smarter than the community banks than that they can do with it. It's because they have that access to cheaper money, which means they can actually benefit from those prices. When you're talking those other banks within those community banks, they can't loan at the rates with it and be affordable, because the rates of money with it, they have to pay higher rates because they're further down the totem pole. They don't have that exclusive first access to that money. They have to go down. They're down the totem pole when it comes down to that. And this is something in which, when we view the economy, we need to view this first. Now, when we start to view what's actually happened with it, is we see that even stores are starting to many more stores are starting to pop off and starting to disappear. Even actual franchise stores are starting to actually disappear. And you could pretty much go through the news and see uh, basically looking at the different things out there. I mean, when we look at it, is Lord & Taylor is closing its business after 194 years of business. This is not exactly something in which is something that is that we should view as something that's we can actually view as a positive thing. If we look at what's they've done from Forbes actually pretty legendary, and they're gone. Catherine's, all 320 stores gone. Chuck E. Cheese, 54 stores in the U.S. gone. See, Coldwater Creek, 334 retail, one factory, and seven Day Spa gone. They're in bankruptcy. Destination Maternity, 90 stores gone, bankruptcy. Earth Food, 40 stores gone, bankruptcy. GNC, 1,200 stores, they're gone in bankruptcy. G Straw Raw, bankruptcy, 24 stores. Gym, 24 Hour Fitness, bankruptcy, 130 stores. J. Crew, 54 stores, bankruptcy. J.C. Penney, their actual stock is their actual stuff is down 2.6%. 100 stores, bankruptcy. Roots USA bankruptcy. Roots USA bankruptcy, 7 stores. Sears, 51 stores, bankruptcy. Now Sears is not exactly a small store. Stage Stores, 738 stores. They're liquidating. Steinmark, 250 estimated stores, bankruptcy. Sur La Table, 51 stores, bankruptcy. Tailored Brands, 500 stores, bankruptcy. The Paper Store, 86 stores, bankruptcy. Tuesday Morning, 230 stores, bankruptcy. AC Moore, 145 stores. Art Van Furniture, 190 stores. AT&T, 250 stores. Bath and Body Works, 50 stores. Bed Bath and Beyond, GameStop, 320 stores. Gap, 232 stores. Guess, 100 stores. Hallmark, 16 stores. Obviously, they did Lord & Taylor again. Lowe's Canada, 34 stores. Lucky Market, 32 stores. Macy's, 125 stores. That's over a 3-year period. Microsoft, 77 stores. New York and Company, 27 stores. Nordstrom, 16 stores. Office Depot, 90 stores. Olympia Sports, 76 stores. Party City, 21 stores. PVH Heritage Brands, 162 stores. Rent the Runway, 5 stores. Signet Jewelers, 232 stores. Starbucks, 400 stores over 18 months. Ulta Jewelry, Ulta Beauty, 19 stores. Victoria's Secret, that does not happen during this time. And we should be viewing this very, very simply, that we are not in a booming economy. And this is something very, very simple. We've gone through all of these numbers of stores, and we're talking when you lose, basically, that's just one from, we're talking about a month ago, or about a month and a half ago, I should say, and that is showing that we've lost about 14,000 stores. And we look at that. Then we look at so when we look at all these things, is that's not exactly a booming economy. That's showing that we've actually really retracted our economy. Now, another factor we need to look at is if we've actually had a place that, and at a higher rate, was actually later in January to even February at best. These are our data points that we have. I mean, these are at the highest place where we're starting to get anybody coming in sick at any level with it. But it wasn't really until like March where we would have actually, anywhere March to May, that we have actually had any type of economic effects from this. And that means why were they running quantitative easing back in September? This means our economy was weak back then, and we should realize that the economy wasn't strong. That's number one. Number two is that the economy was strong, they would have been able to normalize rates. Now, when we view our actual real inflation rates, it has actually been for the last, we're talking roughly about 20 years, or at least a decade, I would say, decade to 15 years, we're talking about 10%. So they should be able to push up $1 billion on that. And if we did that on two-thirds of a point, we're talking $1 trillion would be 1 point. What is this when we get to the point of where we are no longer the world's reserve currency, and this is going to happen. This is the Congressional Budget Office knows that this is going to happen, and it's going to happen one time or another, where it could be where there is either no reserve currency, where everybody's trading in their own currency, and there's just basically a trade-off between each one, and then we're just going to use the current rates, and nobody's going to be trading in a universal currency. Or B, it's probably going to be the yuan. The yuan because they have overtaken the U.S. as the number one output for economy. So when we're talking about that is, and especially with them being backed by gold now, they're a lot more stable of a currency as opposed to the U.S. dollar. U.S. dollar is another fiat currency, which makes them very, very unstable. And it proves so with it because the U.S. I mean, currently the U.S. Dollar index is crashing. It's below 93, and it's going to get into levels in which it keeps on crashing, and it's not going to be going up with it because no one currently with it. Not many countries around the world are believing in it anymore, and this is going to cause massive. Not only do we have a debt bond crisis, going to cause massive. Not only do we have a debt bond crisis, both private and public, we also have a crisis of where people are actually having crises on the actual belief in the dollar. So they're actually finding their own currency to trade with one another. And this is very, very troubling because it's actually pushing us away from the world reserve currency. And if we get blocked from that, then what ends up happening is we isolate ourselves from trade. And that's where you cannot do that. This is why you cannot bully yourself with this. This is part of that thing of Trump bullying himself, of being a bully around the world, of thinking he can get better trade deals. This is one of the problems when you have the world reserve currency. You can't do that. You have to essentially take what they give you because you are the world reserve currency. And while you need to understand that's a responsibility, and you can be bumped at any specific time. And if you anger other countries, they can say we're not dealing in U.S. dollars anymore, and they can isolate you. And this is the problem. This is where your economy becomes very, very fragile when you have the world reserve currency. You're owning something that's very, very troubling because he all of a sudden now wants to say that, oh, it's a great economy. Now, when the coronavirus comes around, he wants to state that, oh, he's going to have a V-shaped recovery. Hate to tell him, but that debt that we have hanging over our heads is restricting any type of recovery that we can have. That's number one. Number two is restrictions on who he allows us to trade with is another one that's restricting any type of recovery because protectionism damages your economy. Number three is heavy restrictions on immigration restrict your economy as well. It actually damages your economy on massive levels. So when you're doing this, we can actually see in the numbers where it would actually help the U.S. economy over the last 200 plus years, which build up the actual economy that we've actually grown to actually develop into a first world nation. Before that point, before the progressive era, we actually had a very, very big time a big growing economy, and we didn't. And since then, we've actually stifled our economy with this mixed economy idea. And a mixed economy is basically you should realize that that's cronyism. It's mixing the idea of social welfare with with trying to mix that with capitalism, basically putting capitalism with heavy restrictions, which ends up creating a bunch of cronyism. And this is what the progressives did. The progressives also put restrictions on immigration because it was protectionism. And this is basically what we're getting now. And it's pretty much what the socialists want. And it was pretty much a socialist idea. It's a precursor. And what he's doing is pretty much following in the footsteps of what people like Bernie Sanders want. This is why when we get to these men who actually intern the Japanese, these are racists. And this is the same thing with when we look at the progressive Chinese coming in here and taking all the jobs of the during the progressive era. And this was meanwhile the Chinese, when they first came over, all they were doing was railroad work, and the railroad work was actually aiding our system of basically creating a transportation system in which we could actually get goods across the country. Now, restricting that would have actually destroyed our country. And when we were this is what we were doing with that, and we end up seeing with the minimum wage laws. The minimum wage laws were to restrict Southern black workers from coming up north and taking the white union workers' jobs, by actually creating a higher wage to make sure that that one union worker could not be. And it should be considered very, very troubling that people want to actually do this. That we're actually seeing now, that all he's doing is copying this actual disturbing trend that we actually saw during that era, that actually led to the actual all these disturbing trends that actually led to the 1929 crash. All this protectionism, uh, all this uh, all this anti-immigration sentiment. And when you see this, it ends up destroying the actual economy. And if you look at the stuff under FDR, you can see that his actions actually caused the Great Depression to spread out far longer than than it was actually meant to spread. Now, if we look at Trump with it, all he's doing is he's basically, by using the Federal Reserve to pump up the bubble, he's basically delaying the inevitable and making this the American people, by actually letting real growth happen. We need real growth, not actually this fake money. We need to end. You need to do an actual honest monetary policy, and we need to let the actual amount of inflation and interest rates go up and be normalized. It might be what it might be very, very painful for a while. You might have to cut a lot of things, but the fact is and get to a policy that might be that might be bare bones for our government. But the fact is we need to actually deal with what we've actually created. And once we get rid of a lot of these things, we need to keep government at bare bones, because the fact is we're in a situation where we have a lot of trouble going on right now. Now, while he's done a couple of things that have been positive by extending out the actual spending and spending more than Barack Obama did, he put more strains on the economy than even Obama could. And this is very, very troubling, and he should actually actually mad. That's far from it. That's very, very far from the actual strongest economy we've ever had. If you actually go previous to the progressive era, we've actually had much stronger economies, and we were not dealing with the actual massive debt. I mean, if you look at the actual debt, when we look at percentage of debt to GDP, we can actually see it's far lower. This is just unbelievable what we're doing now. And people try to say that, oh, we need this amount of defense with it, of military spending, because of compared to GDP. Well, no, you don't compare your defense to GDP. You only buy what you need. Because, I mean, people do not buy a house based on percentage of their earnings. I mean, certain people that are making less money are going to in what the average person that's maybe not as wealthy is making. I mean, there when we look at that, that would be like a home. There would be roughly, when we're talking on like a mortgage price, that would be like a home that would be roughly multi billions of dollars. There is no home that exists that's basically a home that would be the size of a that would be roughly the size of a small town. If it was actually constructed basically from scratch. and buying the land with it if we're buying cheap. And if you're buying actually within the U.S. and if you knew where to place the land, I mean, this is not so you would actually be spending far more. Uh, so that when you have these wealthy people, they spend far less on homes when it comes to percentage. This is why you don't you don't spend in certain things based on always spend based on need. And you say, okay, I I need a home with it. This is how much I can afford. This is how much you would be able to say how much I can afford with it, or this is what I need with it. But if you're on a tight budget, you put how much you can afford, and you put what you need, what your needs are for that area. Now, when it goes to let's say for defense, we don't need to be defending other countries. All we need for defense is to defend ourselves and our territories. That's it. Our major concern is to make sure we don't get attacked. That's it. There's no other concern than that. And we have no other bearing with any other country. Every country is responsible for their own defense. Now, this is one thing where he's hampering our own economy because this is adding up to the debt. And who's basically picking up the debt? Well, it's Russia, China, and actually the retirees of the post. Obviously, they can buy whatever stuff it would be, but then guess what? The government doesn't have anybody else to rely upon. And with the harassment of China and Russia, it looks like China and Russia are not too thrilled with continual buying of debt bonds. And even Saudi Arabia has basically released a lot of their debt bonds as well with it because of reduction in oil price as well. So when we talk about it is we don't have anybody really buy these debt bonds anymore. And this should be concerning for anybody that thinks that we have this great economy going. This means we can't go any further in debt. This means if we probably go any further in debt. This means if we probably have a maximum, and I'm talking maximum of about 40 trillion. Goes 4 years, he will hit $40 trillion, and this should be a very key number that we should realize that either one of those two, if they do this thing with it, this will be in where we're talking at default levels of debt because we don't have the money. We're hitting our max because right at that point we're talking people will dump us as a reserve currency and they will dump these debt bonds because they don't pay anything. People are all over the world switching that over and putting it into precious metals because precious metals are gained far more when it comes down to actual value. These debt bonds, they don't pay anything because we don't have the money to actually dish out in interest and the interest is only going to have to fall. And Trump has even talked about negative interest, which means basically if you put in money, he wants to steal your money. We cover these bonds with whatever type of fraction with it. And what's he going to do? No interest on these debt bonds? No one's going to buy that. And eventually we're going to come to the point where to basically convince people to buy these bonds, we need to raise the interest rates. And when you raise the interest rate, this is going to cause a larger and larger and larger percentage of the actual budget. And when we view this as even as you start to add debt naturally, it naturally causes a larger and larger and larger percentage. So it's going to exponentially rise into a larger percentage naturally. And when you start to have the two things go up, both interest rates and the actual size, the actual size of the bonds that need to be paid, you're talking this is going to be much more painful when it comes down to what it covers.